What is your key takeaway from this report, given the fact that now demand is very much a big part of this equation for oil prices going forward as well?
So Steve rightly focuses in there on the demand situation and the slowdown in the OECD part of the world, the developed economies, and particularly the IEA highlights Europe as going through a really kind of a fragile patch now, with all sorts of uncertainties in the Eurozone area, as well as in OECD Asia, meaning Japan and South Korea. But my other, the other big interest of the oil market is also Venezuela and the really escalating crisis happening as we speak in Venezuela, with countrywide electricity outages. And this has direct relevance for the oil market because that Venezuelan oil production requires electricity. It's a heavy oil. They need electricity supplies to actually get the oil out of the ground. And so the IEA has spent a lot of time looking at this and says this could be a real challenge for the oil market.
Can you take us through, Nick, that dynamic? We oftentimes in the U.S. focus very much on light sweet crude, West Texas Intermediate, and then Brent, the heavier stuff, we'll call it, right? There's a difference between them. And how does that difference in oil grades play into the price dynamic that we're seeing developing in the market right now?
So in the U.S., your refining industry on the Gulf Coast is very much set up to process those heavy crude oils, which Venezuela is a prime source for that heavy crude for the United States. So there's a direct kind of interplay there, and I think that is something that will be occupying U.S. policymakers in a big way. But there is some good news in terms of security of supply, which is that OPEC producers in the Gulf region also produce this heavy crude oil, and they actually have quite a lot of spare capacity, the IEA is saying today. Because they've been cutting back on production, countries like Saudi Arabia and Iraq, they do have the spare capacity to step in if, as is quite possible, we see a really precipitous drop further in Venezuela. And there are others out there willing to step into the gap. And interestingly, in the report, they noticed that Russian exports of crude oil to the United States have actually increased quite significantly in the last month. Russia also produces a fairly heavy crude oil, and that can take the place of the Venezuelan crude. But it's quite unusual for, significant amounts of Russian crude to come into the United States. So I think that's quite an interesting thing to note.